April 1945. Somewhere along the Rhine, she weighed 83 pounds. A 24-year-old woman who had once studied literature at the University of Heidelberg, a woman who had laughed in cafes and debated Goethe with classmates. Now she sat in mud indistinguishable from human waste. Her eyes had sunken into her skull. Her teeth had begun to loosen from her gums. The gray uniform of a Wehrmacht Signals Auxiliary, a Nacritan Helferin, hung from her frame like a sail with no wind. Around her, 17,000 prisoners sat in an open field surrounded by barbed wire. No tents, no latrines, no food distribution for 4 days. Just rain, mud, and the slow arithmetic of death. She no longer remembered what hunger felt like. Hunger was a sensation. This was her body cannibalizing itself from the inside, organ by organ, in a slow biological surrender. On the afternoon of April 19th, 1945, a 20-year-old private from Ohio named Thomas Brennan walked along the perimeter fence and saw her. She was not crying, not begging, simply sitting against a fence post, staring at him with eyes that had stopped expecting anything. He had seen corpses that looked more alive. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a tin of Spam, and did something that could have earned him a court-martial. He knelt down, pushed the tin through a gap in the fence, and placed it directly into her skeletal hands. She looked at the tin, then at him. "You're mine now," he said quietly, not as a threat, not as a claim of ownership, as a promise. I see you. I claim responsibility for you. I will not let you die. To understand what that woman was doing behind that wire, we must understand what Germany had become by spring 1945. The Treaty of Versailles after World War I had not been a peace treaty. It was a humiliation designed to cripple Germany permanently. It created a wound in the German national identity that predatory leaders would later exploit. By 1932, Germany was in free fall, unemployment above 30%, hyperinflation a recent memory. Adolf Hitler did not seize power through military coup. He was elected, embraced by a population so desperate for stability, they traded democracy for the promise of bread and dignity. By 1943, the tide had turned. The Wehrmacht had broken at Stalingrad. Allied bombers reduced German cities to rubble, and rather than accepting defeat, the regime accelerated toward annihilation, conscripting everyone, old men, teenagers, women. These were the Wehrmacht Schelferinnen, women in gray uniforms who operated telephone switchboards and decoded messages. They were not soldiers. But by 1945, they became prisoners all the same. She remembered the morning the war reached her. March 1945, a communications post near Koblenz. The first shell hit 200 meters from the building. The windows shattered inward, a sound like 1,000 tiny bells breaking simultaneously. Then silence, then screaming. She ran. Everyone ran. She walked for 6 days toward what she hoped would be the more merciful embrace of the Americans. On the 4th day, she stopped eating. There was simply nothing left. On the 6th day, an American sergeant looked at her gray uniform and pointed toward a truck. "You're military. Get in." 27 women were inside. Some were crying. Some are staring at nothing. One is already dead. When the truck stopped, she saw the field. A field filled with tens of thousands of human beings. Sitting, standing, lying in mud. No structures. No shelter. Just wire and guards in an endless gray sky. She was pushed through a gate and became a number. The camps along the Rhine were not designed to kill. They were designed to process the overwhelming flood of German military personnel, more than 8 million, who surrendered in the final weeks of the war. But the logistics exceeded anything the Allies had planned. The result was camps where prisoners received 800 calories a day, when they received anything at all. Open field without sanitation, medical care, or shelter from the rain. Dysentery spread. Typhus spread. Men and women who survived the war died by thousands in the weeks following the ceasefire. The woman from Heidelberg waited to die. She had watched 3 women in her section die that week. One from dysentery. One from exposure. One from something no one could name. simply a giving up so complete that her heart forgot to beat. She had begun to envy them. And then the American appeared with a tin of Spam. Private Thomas Brennan was violating regulations. The non-fraternization policy was absolute. American soldiers were forbidden from friendly contact with German prisoners. The German population had enabled Hitler. They had looked away while millions were murdered. They were not to be treated as friends. But Thomas was not thinking about policy. He was thinking about his mother, about the way she had looked at him when he shipped out, standing on the platform at Cincinnati Union Terminal, her hands gripping her purse, her eyes refusing to cry. This woman in the mud had the same eyes, the look of someone watching something precious disappear. He came back the next day, and the day after. Each time he brought something: a chocolate bar, a portion of his rations, a canteen of clean water. He learned her name was Margaretti. She had been a university student, conscripted in 1943 for communications duties because she spoke English. She had never fired a weapon, never hurt anyone. On the 5th day, he spoke to his sergeant. "There's a woman in the camp. She's going to die." The sergeant looked at him with tired eyes. "A lot of people are going to die, Brennan. She's not military." "Not really. She was a switchboard operator. She weighs less than a child. I'm asking for help." What happened next was never officially recorded. But 3 days later, Margaretti was transferred to a civilian processing center with marginally better conditions and actual medical staff. Thomas Brennan had traded every cigarette he had and promised obligations he would spend months repaying. When she was loaded onto the truck, he walked to the gate. "You're mine now," he said. She heard him. She remembered, and she survived. Germany in summer 1945 was not a nation. It was a geography of ruins inhabited by ghosts. Dresden was ash. Berlin was a moonscape of craters where women, the Trümmerfrauen, passed bricks hand to hand, slowly clearing the debris of a destroyed civilization. By the winter of 1946-47, the hunger winter, the average German civilian consumed below 1,000 calories daily. This was starvation. Children died first, then the elderly, then everyone else. Margaretti survived because Thomas had arranged for her to work as a translator for the occupation, a job that came with ration cards and the thin margin between life and death. He wrote to her, letters that crossed oceans to reach a woman in a bombed-out Frankfurt apartment. She wrote back. Neither named what was growing between them. It was too fragile, too weighted with the complications of victor and vanquished, savior and saved. But it grew anyway. In 1947, the non-fraternization policy was officially lifted. Thomas Brennan returned to Germany as a civilian, using 2 years of Army savings to book passage across the Atlantic. He found Margaretti in Frankfurt. She was still thin, still haunted, but alive. They sat in the ruins of a cafe that had no coffee to serve, only weak herbal tea, and talked for 6 hours. He asked her to come to America. She said yes. The wedding took place in a bombed-out church in August 1947. 12 people attended. There was no music because the organ had been destroyed in an air raid. Margaretti Brennan arrived in New York Harbor on October 3rd, 1947. She saw the Statue of Liberty from the deck. She did not feel free. She felt suspended between a country that had been destroyed and a country she did not yet understand. It would take years before she felt anything like home. They settled outside Dayton. Thomas worked at a manufacturing plant. Margaretti found work as a seamstress. They had 3 children. They did not speak about the war. An entire generation made the same choice. The silence was a survival mechanism, a way of living forward rather than being consumed by what lay behind. Thomas woke screaming 3 nights a week for the first decade. He never told Margaretti what he had seen, the concentration camps, the mass graves. He carried those images alone. Margaretti carried her own. The camps, the woman who died beside her on the truck. The last time she saw her mother, a goodbye that became permanent, when British bombers destroyed her family's home. It was not until 1987, when Thomas had been dead for 3 years, that Margaretti finally wrote it down. A letter to her grandchildren. 27 pages describing everything: the war, the camps, the young American soldier who knelt at the wire. She explained what those words had meant. Asterisk, you're mine now. Asterisk, not ownership, responsibility. In a world that had abandoned her, one person had looked at her and said, I will not let you disappear. That was what survival required. Simply being seen, being claimed by someone who refused to let you become an abstraction. Margarethe Brennan died on March 15, 2003, in Ohio. She was 82. Her granddaughter held her hand and whispered the words Thomas had spoken 58 years earlier. You're mine now. Something moved across Margarethe's face. Recognition, perhaps, or peace. Then she was gone. This story matters because it refuses the categories we use to make sense of war. It is not heroes and villains. It is broken people finding each other in the ruins. Thomas Brennan was not a saint. He was a 20-year-old who saw a dying woman and made a choice. A small choice that cost him nothing but cigarettes and favors. But that choice meant a woman who should have lived instead to raise children, hold grandchildren, write a letter that would be read for generations. That is the mathematics of mercy. One choice, one moment of seeing, one refusal to treat a human being as an abstraction. The question Thomas answered, will you see this person? Will you claim responsibility? Never stops being asked. It is asked in refugee camps, in homeless shelters, on every street. Whether you can look at one human being and say, you're mine now. The last line of Margarethe's letter reads, asterisk, I do not know why he chose me. There were thousands of us. I was nothing special. I had given up, but he knelt at the wire and said words I did not understand until much later. He said, you're mine now. And I still am, buried beside him in American soil. I am still his. And that is not a prison. That is the only freedom I have ever known. Asterisk,